Hello, Dog Nation. I am Brandon Adams. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. We're presented by Kroger, and we have finally reached the day before the game. Go for 2 in 22. Next step on that, taken tomorrow against the Ohio State Buckeyes, and we are so excited about that possibility. We're going to talk about every angle on that game today as we kind of do our final DawgNation Daily prior to the game. Kind of fun to have the bowl game, the playoff game on a Saturday. It sort of feels like a regular normal game week, which I enjoy. We will conclude that in style today after a really fun day yesterday. And I appreciate you tolerating us doing a little bit different type of thing yesterday. But we had a great time with Media Day yesterday. But it's fun to be back in the saddle again here today, sitting in the spot we'd like to sit in the friendly confines of our DawgNation World Headquarters studios. That's the luxury of having this game in Atlanta. And absolutely talking to you about everything that's going to go down between Georgia and Ohio State. I do believe we've seen a little bit of a mood shift here the last couple of days. We'll talk more about what that is and kind of what that might mean for this game here coming up. We'll catch up with Jeff Sentell, who's both been in Atlanta this week covering Georgia, Ohio State, but also in Orlando here this week too, looking at some of the events going on with one of those high school football all-star games. We'll kind of get some interesting information from Jeff on that, including a really provocative statement from Janelle Aguero, a UGA signee. We'll get some stuff from Jeff coming up on that. So we have got a lot to do today. So what do you say we get it started? We'll get you ready for Georgia and Ohio State as the Dogs look to go for 2 in 22. Very, very excited about that. It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. We're presented by Kroger. It begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Kroger. Fresh for everyone.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
All right, a little bit of an apology here off the top. I got a little bit of a weird nose thing going on. I feel fine. I'm not sick or anything like that. It's just a little bit of congestion that kind of hangs around my nose here a little bit. So it's fine if I'm not speaking. When I start speaking, it kind of, I don't know, hangs down a little bit. So I want to say this off the top. I hope it's not too annoying. I'm irritated by it. Hopefully it's not, too much for you all to tolerate. But I just want to say that off the top of the show. Sorry, I sound a little bit weird. I feel fine, but I just sound a little bit weird. So I apologize for that. Also wanted to say thank you for allowing us yesterday to have such a cool experience. Being a part of the Media Day festivities down there at the Peach Bowl was a lot of fun. Hope you enjoyed the kind of different look at some of the Georgia players we were able to give. I thought they were relaxed. They look comfortable. I've been telling people this week, to me, this Georgia team looks like the kind of team that's been in the college football playoff 2 consecutive years. So they just seem like they kind of know the lay of the land. They've obviously been through this. They know what success tastes like in the college football playoff. And I think they have a pretty clear pathway in mind of how they can achieve that again. Now, that alone does not guarantee victory or anything like that. Sometimes that kind of, perceived confidence or the image of projecting confidence can be misleading. It can be kind of a false positive. But I have, and if you go back and watch our video, DawgNation YouTube page, maybe the best place to see this, that if you go back and rewatch our video that I was able to be a part of yesterday, I'm just kind of moving about the room. All of this is sort of unplanned and relaxed, and, nothing's too staged here. If you go and really look those Georgia players, whether it be Sentell Granger kind of drawing with the sketch there, or some of the guys grabbing the microphone and doing some interviewing themselves, or whatever kind of viral type moment came out of this, Georgia yesterday just came across as a very relaxed team. They seem to be enjoying the week, and they seem to be ready for what's going to happen on Saturday night when this game is taking place. And yet, in addition to that, let me kind of sort of say this too. I think it's been really interesting to watch the ways in which the mood around this game is starting to shift. And for the most part, I don't think this is involving the players. I mean, some of what I'm about to give you comes from players in this game, I guess. But I think some of the stuff that has gone on has finally started to make the feeling between the two fan bases feel a little bit more like the fever pitch that I sort of expected the entire time. And to be honest with you, I'm just being very candid here for a moment. The build-up to Georgia and Ohio State has not exactly been what I expected it to be. I expected the fact that these two teams hadn't played each other since the end of the 1992 season, the fact that there's really no shortage of reasons to hate Ohio State if you're not an Ohio State fan, the fact that if you're Ohio State, it's easy to have a chip on your shoulder because you've heard about how great the SEC is, and obviously if you're a Buckeye type person, you're led to believe that your team could be just as good. That all the backstory that's involved here, I thought this game would have the lead up, the build up of almost like a rivalry-style feel to a college football playoff game. And there's been some of that, but I would say for the most part, it's been kind of quiet on that front. Part of this is because Ohio State lost his last game, and it's only just now that Ohio State fans are starting to shake off the feeling of having lost to Michigan and start to believe again about their ability to compete with Georgia. So as you get close to the game, some of those emotions sort of shake off. I talked about this the other day, that there's a little bit of a sort of a typical mood shift as you move towards game time. I think you see some of that with Ohio State, and as they kind of shake off the doldrums of having lost to Michigan, I think you see a little bit more passion coming out of them, and that kind of creates its own kind of counterbalance when it comes to the Georgia fans there too, because over the past couple of days, you have definitely seen fans going to their corner a little bit more here, and you've definitely seen the makings of what I think can be a pretty tense atmosphere between these two teams on Saturday. Let me start with this, if you don't mind. This is one of those things that definitely got Georgia fans worked up the other day. So a couple of Ohio State players were being asked about, hey, the perceived strengths that Georgia has offensively, and is there any area by comparison that the Buckeyes feel they are also strong in and have an advantage over Georgia? Trio of Buckeyes players had a chance to answer that question. Let me let you hear that. Then we're going to kind of zero in on the one part of this answer that definitely got the most attention. Let's hear this.
A lot has been made of this Georgia offense and some advantages they may have. Where do you guys, and this is for all of you, where do you guys think you may have some advantages?
Everywhere. I think it just comes down to, all of us just doing our job, and if we do that, we have a really good chance.
Yeah, I agree with Tommy. I think we got, advantages, across the board on both sides of the ball, and we just got to, go out there and execute.
Yeah, I agree. I think it just comes down to doing your job and executing at the highest level, and I think we should be fine.
So that's the answer to the question. All three players gave it. But there's a portion of that got a lot more attention from Georgia fans. Jack Sawyer is a good defensive end from Ohio State. It was his answer in the middle there that when you pull it out and listen to just that clip, the feeling around what he had to say comes across as very different. This has been shared on social media all kinds of times since Sawyer said that. From the answer a moment ago, kind of zeroing in on what kind of turned into a little bit of a viral clip and has really kind of gotten Georgia fans fired up in these final hours before the game. Let me let you hear just the Sawyer part of this, and you can maybe see why some Georgia fans have gotten a little edgy about this.
Yeah, I agree with Tommy. I think we got, advantages, across the board on both sides of the ball, and we just got to, go out there and execute.
So I think that in the full context, I don't know that the Sawyer thing is quite as bad as it comes across in that sort of shorter clip there. Georgia players were asked about this yesterday. They all gave very careful answers. Obviously, the media training that Georgia has would, at least on the basis of this exchange, appear to be superior to whatever the Ohio State players have kind of gotten here. But at the same time, I don't mind a guy speaking his mind if that's what he wants to do. But when you kind of sort of chop up just that part of the clip, all of a sudden you hear the Ohio State players say, oh, yeah, we feel like we've got advantages up and down the field on both sides of the ball. Well, listen, I don't have to tell you how Georgia fans are going to take that. Oh, really? Is that really what you think here? And even if the actual context of the answer may not quite be as it has been taken at times on social media, I don't mind telling you, if this is what it takes to get Georgia fans fired up and ready to go for Saturday, good. Use it. Use whatever you have at your disposal. And should the Georgia coaches use this, whether Sawyer quite meant the way that he said it or not, you better believe you should use that. You should use anything you can to get ready for this game. And if that's what it takes to sort of get us moving the direction of the kind of tension that ought to exist when you've got Georgia and Ohio State doing their thing on Saturday, yeah, you better believe that's the case. Now, it's not just the Georgia fans who are also kind of getting worked up here and kind of getting into a lather prior to the game. You've got Ohio State folks doing that there as well on the basis of a pretty specious rumor here. There's a guy named Jeff, is it Snook or Snook? I'm assuming it's Snook. I can't imagine his last name is Snook. But Jeff Snook, I guess he's a reporter that covers Ohio State or something. I don't know. He put something out there on his blog, I guess, and it has been like passed around a bunch there too. I think maybe most prominently a Facebook post that sort of did this. I'll show this to you, and then we'll let you hear a Georgia coach responding to this. So there's a Facebook group or page, whatever you want to call it, called Buckeye Talk. And it is written here that I just read from Jeff Snook's page that he's a sports writer that covers Ohio State extensively. Excuse me. I had no idea he covered it extensively. He doesn't just cover it. He covers it extensively. Do we cover Georgia extensively around here? I hope we do. Anyway, the quote from Mr. Snook is that rumors are going around that Ohio State found a hidden camera aimed at the practices at Mercedes-Benz Stadium during the closed practices. If true, that would not surprise me from Georgia coach Kirby Smart. He says, I had an altercation with him 8 years ago at the Sugar Bowl. Something tells me that Mr. Snook's altercation with Kirby probably meant more to Jeff Snook than it did to Kirby Smart. But nonetheless, I had an altercation with him at the Sugar Bowl 8 years ago when he was Alabama's defensive coordinator, when he got mad at my question about openly soliciting Big Ten coaches on what to expect from Ohio State's offense before the first playoff game. He made it clear that any research was fair game, Jeff Snook says. He says, now all that being said, I cannot confirm that UGA coaches spotted Ohio State. I'm gonna run with it anyway, but I can't confirm that it's true. I'm just gonna run with it. He says, I can't confirm they were spying on practices, but in the old days, this was a very common practice given the amount of time between the regular season and the bowl games, especially in places like the Superdome. All I can say is that it would be, if it were to be done today, Smart is the guy to do it. That's coming from a guy named Jeff Snook, who apparently covers Ohio State. He doesn't just cover them. He covers them extensively. And that is what he says, accusing Kirby Smart of I guess, cheating here and spying on the practices, using some sort of camera for all of this. There was a good exchange yesterday. I guess Kirby was asked about this too, and Kirby had no idea what the question was even about. But Will Muschamp was actually pretty funny on this yesterday. Here's Muschamp from Media Day on the notion that Georgia's using a hidden camera to. First of all, if you saw it, it's not hidden. You know what I'm saying? Like I mean, whatever you want to think about, so-called cheating and spying on practice, can we at least get the word usage right? If the camera was easily spotted, that means it wasn't hidden. So let's stop calling it a hidden camera because apparently everybody in the world, including Jeff Snook and his extensive Buckeyes coverage, even he saw it, or at least he heard somebody saw it. So it's definitely not a hidden camera. But nonetheless, this is what Will Muschamp said yesterday in response to the idea there was a camera filming the Ohio State practices. Take a look at this. Listen.
There's a rumor that Georgia had cameras at Ohio State's practice this year.
Somebody give them to me. I ain't seen it.
There you go. And by the way, that's the yoga. If you're watching a video, you see the Georgia yoga. See, this is how you keep from getting your practices filmed. Do something so inane at practice that nobody wants to film it. That's the great way to avoid all of that. But you hear Will Muschamp a moment ago saying, listen, somebody give those cameras to me because I haven't seen them. And by the way, if you want to know how rumors work, this is how it goes. It started off with some guy named Jeff Snook saying a camera had been spotted, but the Grand Inquisitor talking to Will Muschamp yesterday had turned it into multiple cameras. Did you notice that? That it started off with Jeff Snook of, hey, there was a camera, I think. I can't confirm this, but I'm going to blast it out on the internet anyway. And then by the time that Will Muschamp is asked about it, the guy that asked the question is like, hey, I heard Georgia had multiple cameras, had cameras. So all of a sudden now Georgia's got a production truck sitting outside Mercedes-Benz Stadium trying to film the Ohio State practices. You sort of get an idea of how all this sort of plays out here when it comes to that. But as I said before, the bottom line for me is that, once again, if this is what it takes to sort of make the game feel as edgy and intense as it's supposed to, more power to you. Ohio State can accuse Georgia cheating, accuse Georgia filming practices. Georgia can accuse the Ohio State players of talking down and poor-mouthing Georgia. Whatever it takes, I would say it's all kind of fair game right now to create the kind of the proper emotional response to this. Because here's what you need to know, and most of you do know this, and I'll say it anyway. You do not want to lose this game if you're Georgia. And on the one hand, Georgia's the national champion, and you can't take that away from them. They've been 13-0. They're SEC champions right now. I am not here to tell you that it's a failure of a season if Georgia doesn't win or anything like that. There's a lot to be proud of for what Georgia's done here over the course of the last 13 games. But y'all, you do not want Ohio State to come down to Atlanta and get bragging rights on you. You just don't. You just don't. Do you know what that bunch is going to be like and how long they'll talk about this? And who knows when Georgia gets a chance to get its revenge? You don't want that. And if you're Ohio State, you kind of feel the same way for the different reason. You feel like your program right now is kind of hanging on by a string. Ryan Day's one more big loss away, I would say, from legitimately being on the hot seat. Buckeyes players have been told over the course of the last few weeks they're just not tough enough to hang in environments like this. If you're a Georgia fan, wouldn't it be great to show them? Wouldn't it be great to remove all doubt about whether or not Ohio State belongs and say, for once and for all, emphatically, you just simply don't. And yeah, you can be in the Big Ten, and you can have a gazillion-dollar media rights deal, and your games can be on CBS and Fox and NBC and every other network in the world, and you can have money hand over fist, but you can't buy what it takes to win in games like this. I mean, wouldn't it be great to send that message to Ohio State once and for all? That if we really are kind of getting into a realm here prior to the start of the game where the tension's starting to build, even if it's building for somewhat, kind of contrived reasons, all the better, all the better. On Saturday, there is a lot at stake. There's bragging rights that last for a lot longer than a year. There's a shot at going for 2 in 22. There is, I think, on the minds of a lot of Georgia fans, a hated opponent on the other side of the field. I mean, the moments in college football on a regular basis just don't get much grander than this, much bigger than this. There is so much emotion. There's so much to be gained from the win. There's so much potential pain with the loss that as we get closer to the game time, it starts to feel like all of this is starting to come together. And everyone involved, whether you're a Georgia Bulldog or an Ohio State Buckeye, everybody starts to become a little more aware of just how high the stakes truly are. My name is Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. We are glad to have you with us. Know how you get to us today live on video. We start 9:45, 1st and 15. DawgNation.com, DawgNation app. We're 10 a.m. after that. Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Twitch. We're on the radio at noon on Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref. And we are available as a podcast wherever you find them, including the world-famous DawgNation.com. Just really happy to have you checking in and glad to have you be a part of what we're doing here today. Obviously, we'll get Jeff Sentell coming up. We'll do a lot of stuff there with him. We got plenty more on Georgia and Ohio State there as well. And don't you know our folks at Kroger, they're excited about what's going to go down on Saturday there as well. They've been a part of this with us for the entire ride here. And as we turn towards the new year, they've got some really fun things coming up that they want you to be aware of too, including something you've heard us talk about before, the great event known as Kroger Chef Junior. A couple times a month, Kroger puts together one of these guided kids cooking experiences where you and your children get to step up and be a part of some food preparation and get a chance to make a really delicious food item. It's a great way for your kids to kind of experience what goes into the food preparation process, but also just to taste some, whether it be fun or healthy foods they otherwise might not get a chance to really maybe enjoy quite as much. That's what Kroger Chef Junior is all about. So coming up on January 7th, then the 21st, you get a chance to do that here this month. And it's the dumpling sandwich this month. How good does that sound? A little dumpling sandwich in the wintertime sounds great. And you can do that with our friends at Kroger. So it's $7 per child. Your child's going to get an apron and patch, a chef's hat, a recipe card and box, and the dumpling maker. It's just $7 per child, as I said before. KrogerChefJunior.com, that's the website. The word junior spelled out, Junior. KrogerChefJunior.com for a lot more on that. All right, we're going to talk to Jeff Sentell here coming up in just a moment about a wide-ranging list of topics. But before that, I want to go around the doghouse. It's presented today by our friends at Berkshire Hathaway Home Services. And I thought that Mike Griffith had an interesting day yesterday, spending a good bit of time with Georgia defensive lineman Jalen Carter. Now, I've got some stuff I want to say about Carter as it relates to the game on Saturday. But prior to that, let me let you hear a portion of the interview that Mike did with Jalen. You can see the entire thing on the DawgNation YouTube page. Mike's written a story about this at DawgNation.com. You can kind of connect with that there. But on the comment that everybody's now kind of aware of, Todd McShay, we think unfairly kind of maligning Jalen Carter, really almost slandering him with the idea of character concerns, and that would maybe diminish Carter's draft status in the eyes of some NFL personnel men. That's what Todd McShay said yesterday. Jalen Carter was asked about his response on all that, and I thought that Jalen said it very well. This is Jalen with Mike Griffith on the idea that a ESPN NFL draft analyst called Todd McShay had some pretty bad things to say about him. Good stuff from Jalen, though, in response. Here's Jalen Carter.
A TV guy says, he might have a character issue, and we're looking at it like, this guy's out here playing 40 snaps a game, with a career on the line. How did you, we've asked your teammates, but how did you personally feel when you heard that, and how did you respond to that?
I had somebody come up and tell me about that, but I didn't really let it get to me because I know my character is not bad around my team and on and off the field. So I just let my team, I saw a couple of my teammates spoke about it, and I just said, I'm going to let my teammates speak about it. I don't really have nothing to say.
So Jacob Phillips, who's watching us on YouTube right now, just happened to see this comment in light of hearing from Jalen Carter there. Jacob says, have to rush the passer up the middle and scare Stroud into poor decisions. And I really think a lot of this game kind of comes down to what Jacob says there. I really do. That ultimately, I believe that Jalen Carter is the most important player in the game for Georgia. And frankly, I don't think it's particularly close. And obviously there's a lot of big questions to be answered about UGA. How healthy is Ladd McConkey? How healthy is Warren McClendon? Both those guys kind of dodged those questions yesterday, as you might imagine that they would. But in terms of what is going to happen on the field, for as many issues that matter, the issue that matters most is what happens with Jalen Carter, because you do have to get after Stroud on Saturday. You look at the best wins for Georgia in kind of the recent era. Big-time pass rush is a factor in all these. I'll give you some of the numbers. 6 sacks for Georgia this year against Tennessee. That was a huge top-5 type matchup. Tennessee was actually number 1 in the playoff rankings at the time the game was played. Georgia got 6 sacks and won the game easily. National championship a year ago against Alabama. That's 4 sacks in that game. Pass rush nowhere to be found in last year's SEC championship. Bryce Young sacked 4 times in the national championship. That's the difference in the game. Georgia also had 4 sacks last year against Michigan in the Orange Bowl. That was an easy win against the Big Ten champions. Georgia got that easy win in some respects because of the fact that the pass rush shut up in a big way. Go back to the beginning of last season against Clemson. That was a team that was ranked in the top 5 at the time the game was played. Georgia didn't have much offense that day. Points very hard to come by. Everything that happened defensively truly mattered. And Georgia got 7 sacks of DJ Uiagalelei last September, 2 Septembers ago, there in Charlotte. Once again, a big pass rush helping Georgia win a big game. And if you want to add this on just for fun, go back to the 2020 Peach Bowl, the last time Georgia was in Atlanta for a bowl game against the Cincinnati team that was ranked in the top 10 when the game was played, and by the way, made the college football playoff the following year, and yet Georgia won a hard-fought Peach Bowl against the Bearcats that day, and part of the reason why, on the virtue of 8 sacks against Cincinnati. So top 5, top 10 type competition, big postseason type games. When Georgia's been at its best, the pass rush has been a big part of that. And against Ohio State, that, I believe, has got to be true again. And I do believe the best spot for that pass rush to come from is up the middle. I don't think that Ohio State, with its interior offensive lineman, quite as good as it is with its offensive tackles. And I do believe that Jalen Carter is just the best player on the field. And so where he is, even if it's not him that gets to the quarterback, even if he just sort of creates the kind of chaos that allows somebody else to get there, what Carter does kind of at the front of attack, point of attack for that Georgia defense could open up everything for this team there on Saturday. And then I'll give you one more here as a way of kind of adding all this together, is that ultimately the success of Carter, if he is able to generate that interior pass rush, if he is able to kind of create the tone defensively, ultimately that kind of might set us up to have a little bit of an experience like the SEC championship, where we see very early on that this is a Georgia defense that's going to show up here and perform the way that it has in a lot of big games in the past. And I think in some respects it sort of comes down to the simplest thing of all. It's like when Georgia has had issues in its big games, one of the things you've seen is pretty big point totals on the other side. SEC championship last year, gave up 41 to Alabama, gave up 44 to pandemic Florida in 2020. Gave up 41 to Alabama also, and a couple of weeks prior to that in 2020. The loss for against LSU going back to December of 2019. First of all, it's amazing that you only have 4 losses for this Georgia program going all the way back to December of 2019. It's amazing to think how successful Georgia's been in terms of winning games. But you do see kind of a common thread, though, in the small number of games that Georgia's lost. There has been a big point total on the other side. If Georgia's limiting the opposing offense, it's almost always winning, and in most cases winning by a pretty comfortable, easy situation. A very wide margin it's winning by when it really stymies the opposing offense. And so Jalen Carter, I believe, is the most important factor in doing that on Saturday. What he does in the middle of this Georgia defense, what he does to the middle of that Ohio State offensive line could set the tone for the entire day. And if we're 2 quarters in this game, if we're sitting at halftime and Ohio State's sitting somewhere along the lines of 10 or 13 points, if it's a relatively low total, that could truly be the indication that it is going to be as long a day for the Buckeyes as some of their fans have feared that it might be, that whatever issues they had against Michigan are even more substantial for them against a team like Georgia, which is essentially just Michigan on steroids, that Georgia could send that message in the first couple of quarters on Saturday that it really is going to be that long of a day. And if it does, it's easy to assume the guy we just heard from, Jalen Carter, will help lead the way in doing all of that. That is Around the Doghouse. It's presented today by our friends at Berkshire Hathaway Home Services. On Saturday, Georgia gets the fun of being pretty close to home, obviously playing its playoff game in its home state of Georgia in the city of Atlanta, this stadium that Georgia's been in 3 times before. So they certainly, 3 times before this year, by the way. So they certainly understand the value of that. And Berkshire Hathaway Home Service understands the value of your home to you there as well. Because when you want to sell that home, you want to get top dollar for it. That's what the folks at Berkshire Hathaway Home Service are able to help you do, because they understand that the best time for new beginnings is right now. So when you're selling your house, our folks at Berkshire Hathaway Home Service understand that you've got a big reason for wanting to do that. You've either got a move you want to make to get closer to family, or got a new job, or you have some sort of exciting thing on your horizon that opens up the possibility for a new home and the need to sell your old house to get into that new home. And so that's what Berkshire Hathaway Home Service wants to help you with. They've been a big part of what we've been doing at DawgNation all year long, and they can be a big part of your next story as you make a real estate decision to help you get to where you want to be in life. And by the way, it doesn't have to be a home that you live in. It can be commercial real estate property. Some of you want to open up a business here in 2023. Well, our friends at Berkshire Hathaway Home Service can kind of help you with that commercial real estate transaction there as well. Whatever your needs are, they want to help you meet them. Got a great team of agents stretched in offices and branches all across our great state and our market here right now. So you can find them online for more. It's bhhsgeorgia.com. That's bhhsgeorgia.com to get in touch with our friends at Berkshire Hathaway Home Services. All right, so we've got a lot going on. We have seen Jeff Sentell in Atlanta this week. He's been following Georgia-Ohio State. He was also in Orlando yesterday for some very interesting stuff going on down there with some big-time UGA recruits getting ready to impress during one of the All-Star games that take place this time of year. So what do you say we cover all angles on that? We call it a On the Road, assisted by AAA. Let's talk to Jeff Sentell here right now.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
So Jeff was in Orlando yesterday, busy coming on of recruiting stuff. And Jeff, I definitely want to get to you on that, including some interesting stuff from Janelle Aguero, the prized safety signee for the Georgia Bulldogs. But prior to that, let's continue to set the stage here for Georgia and Ohio State coming up on Saturday. You were in Atlanta quite a bit here this week. You heard from some Georgia coaches and players. You saw a glimpse of some Georgia practice stuff. Admittedly, not much there on that, but you've kind of been around Atlanta, kind of gotten the vibe on all of this. I guess, Jeff, where are you in terms of your what's the word I'm looking for here? In terms of how you expect Georgia and Ohio State to play out on Saturday based on what you've seen here this week?
Yeah, Brandon, you learn a lot. You learn a lot of things. First of all, good morning to everybody. I got some pretty good sources across the country. Got some pretty good connections with a lot of programs. I actually heard some very interesting intel from former Georgia player Amir Speed recently about how a Georgia program matches up with what he saw with the best of the Big Ten recently. But the kind of the consensus from all of that was, maybe 3-4 weeks ago, Georgia was a 2-score, 14 points better than Ohio State. You see how they're banged up at running back, especially banged up with cornerback, Brandon. I don't know how much people are talking about cornerbacks right now. It would be an issue of Georgia going into this game with maybe, only like 2 of their top 6 or 7 corners available for this semifinal game. That's how banged up that Ohio State is. But, maybe that consensus has shrunk a little bit to 10 points per game. I mean, a 10-point spread on Saturday. But there's a lot of confidence that they just can't. Ohio State's going to have a very hard time blocking Georgia, the front seven especially. Georgia will have an edge with their offensive line against the Ohio State front. And maybe the main thing, Brandon, is that you can watch a lot of football and figure this out, that great quarterbacks are merely okay when facing pressure. But when you watch C.J. Stroud a lot so far, even in his, second, third year of being the guy at Ohio State, he's probably just average or maybe a little less than that when he's facing pressure. So there's a lot of reasons there for Georgia and maybe Georgia people to have a good measure of confidence going into this game.
Yeah, I don't think there's any doubt C.J. Stroud has not been the same player. Go back to the Michigan game, probably the lone example of maybe that this year where, you really get in his face and he just didn't look like the same quarterback at all. And I'm going to play devil's advocate here for a moment because while I expect Georgia to win, I have heard Georgia fans this week, Jeff, far more confident in the final outcome in terms of the margin of victory than I have been. And so, as a way of kind of playing devil's advocate against what you just said, while it's true that C.J. Stroud has not been the same when he's been dealing with pressure, it's not obvious to me that Georgia's going to be able to get that pressure given the fact they've really only done that in just the one game this year. Now, to Georgia's benefit, it was the one game they really needed to against Tennessee. But the pressure that Georgia applied so well in 2021, for the most part, that really hasn't been all that present here in 2022. And this is one of those things that honesty just sort of compels me to admit.
Yeah, I mean, I love that phrase, Brandon. Honesty compels me to admit that Georgia really doesn't have to go to that well and bring pressure a lot against certain teams. And, I certainly saw it was in Georgia's bag of tricks against Tennessee and Hendon Hooker. Name drop Javon Bullard here. They can come up with a lot of exotic looks when they need to. And the thing that's maybe even in Georgia's favor there, Brandon, is Georgia hasn't had to. So when there comes a time for them to break glass in need of pass rush, the other team, the other offensive line, those other schemers over there don't have a lot of tape to see what Georgia is capable of and what they can really bring to bear.
Yeah, and obviously Ohio State's been pretty good at keeping Stroud upright, with the exception of the Michigan game. We probably saw a little bit more pressure than he'd seen prior to that. I was talking before you joined us about, to me, that pressure is supposed to come up the middle. First of all, when Georgia has blitzed, it seemingly blitzed up the middle over the course of years, better than other types of quarterback pressures as well. And I think that Jalen Carter is and needs to be the most important player on the field for Georgia on Saturday. I think the Ohio State offensive line is really good with its tackles. I don't know that it's quite as good with its interior offensive line. That's the area in which I believe that UGA is probably best set up to exploit that. And I think that Jalen Carter is going to be a big tool in helping Georgia get that done.
Yeah, and Brandon, not to sound too boastful, but let me provide a little bit of more balance on the other side. Try to sound very objective. That's what my goal is always as a reporter. But, the way they can stay in this thing, I feel, are those deep shots downfield. The kind of the ways that, you attack Georgia in man coverage. You've seen some measures of success from other teams across the schedule where they're like, you know what? In the end, we're probably better served trying to get a chunk of 50 yards at once rather than, beating Georgia on 6 or 7 straight plays down the field. And that's a window, especially because this needs to be said, Brandon, because you will admit this, that you wish Georgia has had the receivers that Ohio State has, especially the last 5 or 6 years. We can count multiple first-rounders among Zone 6 is what they like to call that unit. And, Brandon, you ask a lot of people around the Ohio State program, you ask coaches that know this stuff, and they feel that Marvin Harrison Jr. is better than Olave, better than Garrett Wilson, better than a lot of those guys, all of those guys that Ohio State has lined up, and they've went and shook Roger Goodell's hand really early. So that's a way where that puncher's chance for Ohio State can happen here. And, let's not forget, pound for pound, 1 to 85, maybe even 1 to 105, they're easily one of the 5 most talented teams in the country, probably one of the 3 most talented teams when they had a Trayvon Henderson and when they have a Jackson Smith and Gibba, when they have those guys on the roster as well. Everybody's missing playmakers. Georgia's missing Nolan Smith. Georgia's missing A.D. Mitchell for long stretches this year. But I just think Georgia depth, more of that top-tier NFL draftable depth, was another factor in my mind's eye that gives Georgia an edge.
Yeah, I think you're right about that. I mean, obviously, Ohio State's going to try to use the explosive plays offensively to make up for the fact that on a per-play basis, it's probably not going to just kind of line up and go play for play with Georgia. They're going to try to get their yards in chunks. You can understand why they would. And as much respect as I have for Marvin Harrison Jr., and I do truly believe he's the best wide receiver in the country. I really do. And it's amazing how Ohio State always just kind of finds that next great wide receiver. It's amazing the depth they've had there at that position. I will say that Harrison to me is a little bit different, like what, say, a Jameson Williams would have been last year, something like that. I don't know that Harrison just sort of runs past you and runs away from you. Now, he obviously is outstanding when it comes to finding a way to get the football, but in terms of just leaving the defensive back standing still while he goes blazing by, from what I've seen, I don't quite know that's Harrison's game necessarily. He's definitely a dangerous receiver, but he's not maybe the same kind of guy that maybe, like, say, Jameson Williams would have proven to be so much trouble for Georgia last year in the SEC championship.
Yeah, Brandon, listen real close, folks. I want to tell you this. A lot of the information that I've seen, that I've processed, and that I've heard is Ohio State feels like it is yet to play a complete, full, great game this year. And that's troubling if you're a Buckeyes fan, because a lot of those yards, Ohio State State actually has 2,000-yard receivers this year. Emeka is also very, very good, a former top 100 overall prospect as well. But the thing is, the way C.J. Stroud and Marvin Harrison have had to generate a lot of offense and generate a lot of points this year is it had to be a perfectly thrown ball in a tight window. This is in the Big Ten nonetheless. And it had to be in a way where only the greatest wide receiver in the country could make that catch. That's happened time and time again for what they do so very well. And to ask that program to say, you're going to play your most complete game of the season, and you're going to continue to fit those balls into tight coverage against the number one team in the country, against the best team in the country in Georgia. Man, Brandon, to me, that is a pretty tall order.
All right, I want to talk some recruiting with you in a moment, so let me just kind of say one more thing about this game. To me, a magic number here is 13. I would say 13 or fewer first-half points for Ohio State, to me, is really trending towards the kind of game that I believe that Georgia really wants this to be. And even if the Georgia offensive output's not much higher than that, if after two quarters in this game on Saturday, you're looking at Ohio State kind of somewhere in that sort of 10-point, 13-point realm, something that's well below the pace for what will get them to, like, say, 30 by the end of the game. That to me is an indication that Georgia's kind of heading for what it wants to go to defensively. I'm going to be watching the early portion of this game, in other words, very, very closely here to see how quickly either Georgia establishes its prevailing narrative that the defense is just simply too tough, or if Ohio State's able to establish its narrative, which is, hey, our offense is unlike most of what you've been playing for most of this season. One of those two narratives won't survive, and I'm going to be curious to see which one of those does emerge in that first 30 minutes of action on Saturday.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I know you watch a lot of entertainment, books, and wagering. That first half, if Ohio State doesn't have 17 points on the board, 13 points of confidence on the board, when they're going to be facing a depth issue against Georgia in the second half, I think that's really going to be an issue for things to spark up there. The other thing you watch with Ohio State football, even though Georgia and Georgia people have waited to play Ohio State for so many years, if you watch Ryan Day, you watch him really closely, and when things get tight, and I mean when things get that, put up or shut up, win or go home type moments, he seems to abandon the run game and then basically dial up too much passing game. And that's a real issue when you have a lot of people in this program wondering if Day has too much going on in terms of being a CEO, a head coach, and a play caller. Man, Georgia fans have been in this situation before where the guy that they love, that they feel is the best coach on their staff, no longer is the guy to be calling plays because that head coach role brings so much to bear. And you hear those type of grumblings where maybe he needs to have something taken off of his plate. That's another thing to wonder about with the play calling recently for Ryan Day and Ohio State in very big ball games.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So we'll obviously talk plenty more about that between now and Saturday. I do want to shift gears here, though, and do some recruiting stuff. You obviously had a big day yesterday. Before we hear more about that, let's talk about what we're doing here right now. We're on the road, assisted by AAA with Jeff Sentell here on DawgNation Daily, and obviously AAA, such a great resource for us when we're traveling around during the holiday season. I'm so thankful to have their legendary roadside assistance. If something goes wrong for me while I'm on the road, driving back home from Rome last night, I was thinking about that. Listen, if my car breaks down, I'm kind of in the middle of nowhere. I might not know what to do, may not know where I am, but our folks at AAA can obviously help us out with all of that. But they're also a great resource for your insurance needs there, too, including your auto insurance there as well. Because AAA's got a 93% satisfaction rate. That means that when they've been doing business as long as they've been doing it, and they're taking care of people to the tune of a 93% satisfaction rate, they're doing something right. And they can do something right for you there as well. So you can give them a call, 833-718-2075. That's 833-718-2075 to find a branch near you and find out the great things they can do for you from an auto insurance standpoint. All right, Jeff, so I want to ask you a moment about the Janelle Aguero thing in particular. You tweeted this yesterday. I thought that was interesting, so we'll talk about that. But before that, kind of remind folks where you were yesterday, what you were doing, and the various UGA signees that you saw in action.
So Brandon, I know you love this show. I love this show. You remember The Sopranos when Tony came into Dr. Melfi's office and they're like, okay, we got a whole bunch of stuff to talk about right now? That's what I feel like after being at Under Armour All-American Media Day yesterday. I think we got to speak to almost every Georgia target or signee there, except for Tyler Williams and Gabe Harris. Gabe Harris actually got nicked up a little bit during bowl practices, and he's not going to be there this week, at least for practices. Maybe he makes it out for the game. But he is one of those 9 Georgia signees that are in town in Orlando or that were scheduled to compete in the game that's not there. Brandon, let me just start with this. Deuce Robinson. It really sounds like he's going to come to Georgia.
Wow.
And I say this because, to kind of give you guys an example of what's going on. Deuce Robinson comes in. He had a late flight. Most thought that Deuce wasn't going to be able to make it. And let's face it, Brandon, Cormani McClain did not talk to anybody yesterday because he had a lot of juice, a lot of smoke, a lot of news around his name. He's a 5-star, the number 1 cornerback in the country. Is it Colorado? Is it Miami? Is it Florida? He didn't take questions. Now, he posed for pictures, but he didn't take questions. Now, the other highly rated 5-star in this game who's undecided, that's Deuce Robinson. And there was I guess, the only big horde of reporters around an interview yesterday that was Deuce Robinson. The old days in these media days, Brandon, when we had traditional signing days, you'd see everybody, and they still had yet to sign in February. So when the 5-star came out and he wasn't signed yet, there were hordes. Now, there were probably 10 media members around Deuce Robinson yesterday when most crowds were about 2 or 3 deep. You had a Texas reporter, you had an Alabama reporter, you had a USC reporter, and you had Georgia reporters. Kind of interesting that those are his Final Four, right?
Yeah.
That's his Final Four. So Deuce starts talking, and he says some really nice things about Texas, and he says some really nice things about Arch Manning and how they talk all the time, and there's a connection there. He says some really nice things about USC, how the baseball opportunity there is really great with USC, that he knows more of the USC commits than any other school. Then he gets to talking about Georgia, Brandon. And the thing he's looking for, Brandon, this is kind of news. He wants to play both football and baseball professionally.
Wow.
Now think about that. Brian Jordan, Deion Sanders, Bo Jackson. I think that's the list, right? The list of folks that can do that. And Deuce is 6'6", about 220 pounds, would be an outfielder in the major leagues if his dream reaches that point. But he starts talking about what he wants, and he wants development. He wants a team that wins. He wants a team that he just feels like he has those great relationships around him, and then where everybody really cares about the program and cares for one another. And then by and large, through about all the questions and answers, he goes to say that really loves the relationships at Georgia, really loves the development, really loves what Georgia has done with Brock Bowers, really loves the camaraderie and how it feels like Georgia cares about one another. And, hey, he's really acutely aware that Georgia wins. You ask Deuce Robinson about basically which relationships does he have at Georgia that maybe mirror like a Arch Manning relationship or his relationship with all the Southern Cal signees right now. He dials straight into Roderick Robinson. He says Roderick Robinson, also a West Coast guy, is his best relationship. They talk all the time. Of course, Todd Hartley's going to be persistent. And, when that media scrum's over, the press corps kind of gets together, and you're like, is it just me, or does it sound like he's really going to go to Georgia? That's what a lot of people nodded their heads with, Brandon. It was almost to the point where folks were wondering who would be second right now. Is it SC or is it Texas? Certainly didn't sound like it was Alabama. All I can say, he's going to take this thing out. He's going to take some more visits. He wants to visit SC again. He wants to visit perhaps Texas again. He wants to see Georgia again. May sneak in a trip to Oregon as well. But he's going to be a traditional February 1 signing day, Brandon. And you just want to tout Deuce Robinson this way. And I think I'm going to try and be as responsible as I can if I can say this. He's 6'6", Brandon. He's about 220. He has the ability to play both sports at a professional level, and he returns punts for his high school team. He was almost exclusively a wide receiver this year in high school out in Arizona. It really sounds like the Dogs could not be better positioned to win the race for Deuce Robinson, and there still seems some more left to do, some more meat on the bone here. But, Dog fans, I'm going to tell you, you guys would be ready to run through a banner right now if you heard a lot of the things that Deuce Robinson said about Georgia yesterday at the Under Armour Media Day in Orlando.
Well, that's really interesting stuff, Jeff. Something else that I saw you had on Twitter is Janelle Aguero. It's fairly easy to assume who this might have been. He said he was offered $3 million by another program's collective and yet came to Georgia anyway. Would you mind sharing a little bit more details about what that was about for Mr. Aguero?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, that story will also be up on DawgNation.com today. What you have here, Brandon, is, you want to ask all those questions about, hey, how were the bowl practices? What are you looking forward to? What's the coolest thing somebody said to you on the recruiting trail? All those are little kind of layup, 3-foot putts, the ones that you make all the time on the golf course, Brandon, with dead-eye accuracy. But then, it kind of compelled me to believe where I was like, let me ask a real question. And I asked Janelle, I said, hey, man, because I knew there was some intrigue around him. Number one is he was a silent commitment to Georgia for about 2 or 3 months prior to his public declaration in the summer. Number two, if you asked him, hey, where were you at a year ago? Where would you have chosen a year ago? And he's like, yeah, probably Georgia. He said he was one of those recruits. He self-diagnosed himself, Brandon. He's like, hey, I'm one of those kids that I go somewhere and I want to commit there. I love it. Right after a visit, I feel great. I'm like, Mom and Dad, let's go there. And the one school he was consistently in love with, Visit High, kept feeling the strongest and the most emotional attachments to Georgia over the course of 2 or 3 years was Georgia. Big shout out there to Will Muschamp for how well he recruited Janelle Aguero, a guy that I think might be getting major minutes for Georgia, maybe midway through his freshman year, at least in certain packages and certainly at least in a minimum of special teams right out the gate at Georgia. He's very fast. He's very physical. But I said, Janelle, man, I got to ask this question. It's a new question, and we're in the NIL era. I said, what sort of schools, what sort of, I guess, offers came your way from collectives in order to try and break that attachment to Georgia? And I said, maybe you don't have to name a school, but what was the type of offers a typical high-ranked 5-star level safety like you was getting on the market? He said, I got about 3. And I was like, wow. And first of all, Brandon, it wasn't $300. And I kind of thought, the numbers that you hear on the trail, that I thought he was meaning $300,000, which would kind of fit a lot of collectives or whatever. And I went back to him a little bit later, and I'm like, so you said $300,000, right? And he goes, no, man, $3 million.
Wow.
And I was like, he looked at me like, you like, huh? Can you tell I looked like a Roadrunner, Wile E. Coyote cartoon. My expression had to look like that. And he goes, like, now it wasn't for 1 year. It was for as long as I was at the school or as long as I was representing the collective. Let me make sure I say that correctly. Not representing the school, but representing a collective, because wink, wink, that's the way these things are supposed to be. But for me, and let's face it, man, he said it over and over to a lot of reporters, why he chose Georgia was development. He wanted NFL money, the type that Lewis Seen got, his great friend. They grew up maybe 20 minutes from one another, their hometowns in Massachusetts. And he said basically that he saw the track record at Georgia. He saw the development at Georgia, which is a pretty wizened, mature outlook for a 17, 18, 19-year-old kid here to go, I'm going to turn down fast money like Steve Harvey, Family Feud fast money, to get real money, generational money, NFL first-round draft pick money in 3 years. He told me, he's like, I just didn't want to sit around and be the guy that had that NIL money worrying I'm not getting developed, I'm not getting played, not getting played enough, I'm not getting tested and battle-tested against great receivers in practice enough. I mean, it was a very, very, very mature way to look at it. Let's face it, Brandon, you ask a lot of families anywhere, regardless of their economic status, and if their high school graduate can get $3 million coming out of high school for a future occupation or for what they want to do, I would say a lot of our world would take that. Most people would take that. But Janelle Aguero, when you watch him shine at Georgia, I want folks to think about that. That he chose the Red G, he chose Georgia, he chose development over some easy, fast money. Perhaps the only, kind of not so great news about Janelle Aguero is he goes to a private school in Massachusetts, and he can't get released until January the 21st, he told us. January 21st-ish. So he's going to be late January by the time he gets to Georgia. And when he gets to Georgia, he told me this one thing that stood out. I was like, what's the first thing you're going to do? And I expected, because, man, they got so many toys in that new facility. I was like, the Lamborghini locker room, the bod pod, the sleep pod. I wanted to know what he was going to do first. He's like, man, train, work, get better every day. That's what I'm going to do. That's what I can't wait to do when I get to Georgia.
Fascinating stuff, Jeff. I appreciate you sharing it with us on the road, assisted by AAA. Glad to have you back in town. We'll see you at Mercedes-Benz Stadium tomorrow. And as you said, reading about a lot of these very interesting recruiting stories from the trip to Orlando at DawgNation.com. We appreciate your time on that. We'll look forward to talking to you then.
Take it easy, buddy. Everybody have Happy New Year.
Thank you.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Yeah, I think for most of us, Jeff says Happy New Year there at the end. I think for most of us, our ability to have a Happy New Year will be determined by the events that transpire between, like, say, 8 p.m. and midnight there in Atlanta. I will either have the happiest of Happy New Years or something quite decidedly different. And we said this off the top of the show, is like the stakes cannot be higher. It's like you do not want to have Ohio State have bragging rights over you. You just don't want it. You just don't want it. You want to avoid that at all costs. And listen, Georgia's had a great season. Georgia's the national champions. There's been so much fun. But to think that you might give those folks up in Columbus a chance to have some sort of bragging rights over you, you don't want that. You don't want that. Instead, what you want, and this is what makes the new year so much fun, instead what you want is the idea of reminding Ohio State they don't belong in the same field with the SEC. Secretly, deep down, they may think that, and a way of demonstrating that on that field on Saturday night, boy, that'd be great. That'd be great. And by the way, also keeping the mission alive to go for 2 in 22. Man, that would be awesome. So, yeah, will we have a Happy New Year? I'll tell you, right about the time the ball's dropping, or I guess in our state it's the peach dropping, right around the time the peach is dropping, I'll tell you if we plan on having a Happy New Year or not. And what these dogs do inside MBS against Ohio State will probably be the determining factor there on all of that. All right, we're going to do some stuff on the other playoff game coming up here in a moment. But before that, let's get ready to go cruise around the SEC courtesy of Royal Caribbean. Man, we're so excited about, speaking of fun stuff in the new year, obviously hoping to celebrate winning against Ohio State, go for 2 in 22, another national championship, hopefully all squared away on all of that, and then we can enjoy the celebration on board Independence of the Seas, much like we did a year ago with the second ever cruise with DawgNation, which kind of became a de facto celebration of that championship last year. We'll hope to do that again. The final night of the cruise is actually NFL draft night. That was true last year, and when we had the great draft party, and we were up on the top deck of Independence of the Seas, and every time one of those Georgia names was announced, we're cheering and celebrating. It was so much fun. And so this year we get a chance to do that all over again. I'm excited about doing that with all of you who are going to be there. I'm going to tell you that it's kind of crunch time as far as getting in there and being a part of this with us. So go to royaldogs.com. That's royaldogs.com. And it's a great website put together by a terrific travel agent named Jessica Slater. Jessica was specially selected for us by Royal Caribbean. So she's going to help you get squared away, get booked up, and be a part of this cruise vacation with us. You can also call her directly, by the way, 770-718-9147. That's 770-718-9147. So we're leaving out of Port Canaveral April 24th, going to Nassau, going to Perfect Day, Coco. Okay, it's a 4-night cruise. We can't wait to have you on board Independence of the Seas with us here with our friends at Royal Caribbean for the second ever cruise with DawgNation coming up April 24th through the 28th. All right. So obviously our attention's kind of on the Georgia-Ohio State thing here for a moment. You've kind of heard me say it the entirety of the week. I believe Georgia wins this game. I don't know that I quite think it's going to be quite as much of a comfortable, easy win as some Georgia fans think it's going to be. I think that Georgia's going to be in a hard-fought game. I think they're going to win it, but I think they're going to have to be at their best to do so. And that's just been kind of my vibe on this the entire time. You know, could it slip away from Ohio State? Could it turn into a more comfortable win for Georgia? Obviously, that possibility exists. But ultimately, I believe this is likely to be one of those games, one of the rare games, by the way, in playoff history, where you probably have a pretty competitive game into the fourth quarter, if I had to guess. And I believe it's one of those things where Georgia on both sides of the ball is going to have to make some plays to win it. How about the other side, though, the Fiesta Bowl between Michigan and TCU? I have been hesitating to make my pick on this just from the standpoint that I've really kind of gotten it wrong with TCU a lot. But as we get closer to the game, I do start to get a little bit of a clearer picture of what to expect between Michigan and TCU in this other side here. First of all, the positives for TCU. I think one of the things that's been true of their league, the Big 12, is, well, there's not really a spectacular team in this league, maybe beyond, obviously TCU that makes the playoff. The overall depth of the Big 12 this year was probably pretty good. You don't have a ton of terrible teams. Ohio State, I guess West Virginia, the best examples of that. But for the most part, the overall balance of the league was really not too bad. And, obviously if TCU is handling that schedule during the regular season, they've certainly done something to be able to do that. And part of the way in which TCU did handle that schedule is they've had to find a way to win late quite a bit. They're 5-1 this year in games decided by one score or less. What's interesting about that is that the other three playoff teams, Michigan, Ohio State, Georgia, have only played in 3 one-score games combined. Michigan was in 2, Georgia was in 1. I don't believe Ohio State's played a one-score game at all this year. So obviously TCU's got a little bit of experience with winning these closer games in a way that Michigan, Ohio State, and Georgia simply have not been able to do or not had to do. And yet ultimately that's what I kind of keep coming back to here, which is, okay, when TCU has had to pull out wins, it's been able to do that. But Michigan, Ohio State, Georgia, they really haven't had to pull out many wins. You would say, well, Georgia did against Missouri. Okay, that's fine. That's fair. Ohio State didn't play great against Northwestern. Okay, that's fine. That's fair. Michigan had its moments maybe at times too. But the greatness in college football, I believe, is demonstrated by margin of victory. How easy do you make it look on a Saturday in, Saturday out basis? And ultimately this year, while TCU's been winning games, it has not been winning them very easily. And when you're pulling out that many close, sort of, down to the wire, nail-biting type games, I think one is left to conclude. I'm not really quite so sure how sustainable all of this is. And so on Saturday, I do expect TCU to lose, just on the basis of the fact that they have been kind of skating by this year in a way that I just didn't imagine would be able to be continued. And ultimately, they kind of ran out a little bit of magic in the Big 12 title game anyway, and I believe they're going to run out of whatever remaining magic they have in this game against Michigan. And in a game like this, and I don't think there's any doubt that TCU is easily the worst of the 4 playoff teams. I don't think there's any question about that in my mind. And I think where you kind of see the biggest disadvantage here is, for all you want to say about Michigan and its physicality and kind of the sort of old school approach that sometimes Jim Harbaugh's thought to take, the truth is this is a team that's averaging 40 points per game here this year. And this is a TCU defense that's only 56th best in the country this year in terms of points allowed. Ultimately, I think the reason why Michigan is likely to win this game, and I believe fairly convincingly, is simply because I don't believe that TCU defensively can stop what Michigan does. When McCarthy throws it, certainly with the ground game, I don't believe TCU is going to be able to line up and stop Michigan. I believe that Michigan's going to score with ease. I think they're going to score with regularity, and I think ultimately they're probably coasting to somewhat of an easy victory. Keep in mind here, about half the national semifinal games we've seen have been decided by 20 points. I mean, we have very few examples of what Georgia-Oklahoma was in 2017. A very close, hard-fought, overtime game in the Rose Bowl. That's the outlier in the college football playoff. For the most part, the playoffs have kind of dealt us one blowout after another. It remains to be seen how close Georgia-Ohio State ultimately becomes. But in the case of Michigan-TCU, this sort of feels like the classic national semifinal game to me, where one team is clearly better than the other. I think in this case, Michigan is way better than TCU. And as we kind of settle into this situation for Saturday, I do like Michigan quite a bit here in this spot. I do. So count me on the side of Michigan here. And so if Georgia can get past Ohio State and Atlanta, my pick is it'll be awaiting Michigan in Los Angeles for the national championship. A rematch from last year's college football playoff. And don't you know, Dog fans would love to have this one in L.A. turn out just like last year's Orange Bowl turned out there as well. But for now, we'll make that cruising around the SEC courtesy of Royal Caribbean. And, of course, here on Fridays on our show, one of the things we love to do is our Big Finish presented by the Finish Long Drink. And obviously for a lot of you getting ready to do some tailgate parties and some things like that, the Finish Long Drink is going to be a big part of your activities there because it's been a big part all season long. And so when you guys enjoy the Finish Long Drink, you're going to have to share some photos with me on that. We share those here on the show there as well. I'm going to show you a great picture here on Twitter. So Morgan Baird shares this. It's the long drink kind of almost like the gifts under the Christmas tree here. Pretty good stuff there. Our folks at the Long Drink had shared this on Twitter too, so I saw that there and put it up here for this today. The Big Finish presented by the Finnish Long Drink. Good to see that Finnish Long Drink tucked under the Christmas tree. Certainly a lot of people would love to have gotten that as a holiday gift this time of year. So Morgan, who shared it, the Finnish Long Drink, who also kind of blasted that out. That is all really fun to see. And by the way, if you have not tried the Finnish Long Drink as of yet, you can do so. Go to thelongdrink.com, and you can put in your zip code. You can find out close to you where you can pick some up today, and then you can try all the various varieties. The cranberry, the Long Drink Strong, 8.5% alcohol by volume. Long Drink Zero, no carbs, no sugar. Long Drink Traditional, that's in the blue can. I like it. It's the grapefruit flavor. You get the gin kick to go along with that. It's like the original, the traditional version of the Finnish Long Drink. Really, really fun, delicious stuff. So please find it online, thelongdrink.com, for a lot more of that. Thelongdrink.com. Also, I gave you some thoughts earlier about the other playoff game between TCU and Michigan. Maybe you think the same way I do. Maybe your pick's a little bit different than mine. Either way, you can make some money on your football knowledge here with our friends at MyBookie. When you open up a deposit, or I should say an account right now, you're in a big deposit bonus when you first sign up. What that means is if you'll use the internet to kind of help you here, just type in MyBookie. They'll help you get to the website. When you get there, use the promo code DawgNation, and then when you make that initial deposit, our friends at MyBookie are going to double that deposit for you up to $1,000. What this means is if you put in $600, they're going to put in $600 for you. You put in $300, they're going to put in $300 for you. So let's say you put in $400, they put in $400 for you. You have $800 in your account before you even win your first bet. So that's why they call it winning season here at MyBookie, because you're literally a winner before you even get started. So go to MyBookie, find them online, use the promo code DawgNation, get the big deposit match up to $1,000. Then after that, you play, you win, you get paid, courtesy of our friends at MyBookie. Make sure you check them out today. All right, hold off on the song here for a moment, because we have a lot of golden shoes I want to give out today. So here's what we've been kind of doing all season long. And we haven't really been doing traditional golden shoes as much this week, because we've been kind of showing you some of the stuff from like the Peach Bowl and kind of showing Georgia kind of having some fun. We've had a chance to kind of showcase some of that for you. But on Fridays, as we close out the show, we like to kind of give good vibes here with Georgia fans feeling happy about the week and kind of just really kind of creating that right atmosphere, that right environment, mentally, spiritually, if you will, to go on and get the big win. And every time thus far this year we've tried this, it has worked really well. So here to close out the show on Friday, we're going to give you about a half dozen golden shoes here. If you're watching on video, you can see these. If you're listening to radio podcasts, I'll do the best to try to describe these to you. But hopefully all of the good vibes created by Georgia fans here, hopefully it creates the right mindset to be ready for wherever you're going to be tomorrow for this game. In Atlanta, if so, I hope to see you there. Or if you got a watch party going on, everybody getting game faces on, everybody getting ready to go for Georgia and Ohio State. So with that in mind, our first golden shoe, let's go ahead and throw it up here. And obviously Mad Dog's so good at this, saying, when you're getting ready to crack some Buckeye nuts, hashtag go for 2 in 22. You get the little handheld nutcracker there, the Ohio State, the Buckeye, which actually is a nut, getting cracked right there as part of the Chick-fil-A Peach Bowl. Mike, that's great stuff. Golden shoe going your way, obviously well-deserved for you there once again. And by the way, keeping the idea of the nutcracker theme going, and knowing we're a couple of days after Christmas here there as well, Bulldog 1982 sent this to me. By the way, he's got hashtag go for 2 in 22 right there in his username. He says, hashtag go for 2 in 22, also go Dogs, and he shows you the Georgia-themed nutcracker. And the nutcracker here is saying, a Buckeye is a nut, you say? You better believe it is. You better believe Georgia's looking to crack them coming up on Saturday. Good stuff there from Bulldog 1982. Payne Dog writes in to say, priming up for Saturday by cheering on the Hoop Dogs. So Payne and his family were there for the Georgia game a little earlier, so I had some fun with that. It says rock the stag, and he is happy about the Mike White era thus far at UGA, and also gives you the go for 2 in 22. So Payne Dog, great-looking family. Glad to see you having a good time there. Our good friend Miriam Corbin sends this to us to say, had quite a few new items added for the Christmas to the Corbin Dog Cave. Now, whatever am I going to do when we not only go for 2 in 22, but also win it in 22 there as well. So Miriam's got a great collection of Georgia stuff there going on. She's having a great time. We appreciate her shouting out go for 2 in 22. Brian Whitehead sends this to me there as well. He says, this is what keeps me up at night. Hashtag Go Dogs, and it's the picture of C.J. Stroud holding up this thing that he held up at Media Days. This is one of those memes everybody does. And the photo that he's holding up is Jalen Carter holding up Jaden Daniels. Really funny stuff. Brian Whitehead, we appreciate you sharing that. We have one more to give you there as well. Should have 6. Apparently we don't. All right, so this was a good one. It was Stetson Bennett with the Go for 2 and 22 T-shirt on, but we will do that for you again next time. Instead, let's go ahead and ready to fire up the fight song, and we'll get ready to wrap up today's show. All right, so good stuff to everybody. Appreciate you being here. And obviously getting ready for a big day tomorrow on Saturday. So, listen, we got lots of video coverage. We'll be giving you the dog walk. We'll be giving you some of the sights and sounds. There was one final press conference today for both these coaches, Kirby Smart and Ryan Day. We may share some of that with you on Saturday there as well. But one way or another, get settled in for a big day. These are the kinds of moments we live for. That chance to see Georgia on the biggest possible stage against the kind of opponent that's very easy to conjure up all the proper emotions for. This is Georgia-Ohio State. We said when the announcement was first made, this was the game that was going to take place. This is as big as it gets. And the closer and closer you get to game time, as big as it feels, you better believe it feels exactly the way it's supposed to. So enjoy the game. Thanks for letting us be a part of your experience as you get ready for it. We'll see you on game day tomorrow. And by the way, Lousy Stinking Gators, Gatorator countdown on the way out the door here. 302 days from right now. We appreciate you. Obviously looking forward to all of that. And we will see you back here Monday for DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger. There you go. Now we got the Stetson Bennett and the Go for 2 22 T-shirt. Joshua Campbell had shared that. Really very good stuff. So appreciate that. Good stuff there as well. Love to see Stetson wearing the Go for 2 and 22 T-shirt. All right, let's get some comments here, and we'll get ready to wrap up here for a Friday and get ready to roll out on all of this. So a lot of folks kind of weighing in and talking. I didn't get a chance to talk to DawgNation.com during our video show yesterday. For whatever reason, it just wasn't working. So I'm going to start with DawgNation.com and our commenters watching on the app and there on the website. So we will do that with you first. TV radio guy says, feel better, BA. Yeah, the good news is I actually don't feel bad. I just sound bad, which irritates me so bad. It just irritates me so bad. Just so irritated. But thank you for saying that. I actually don't feel too bad, though. Don Jones says, if Ohio State has less than 18 at the half, we'll win by 10 plus. Our second half physicality is going to win out. Yeah, my number's a little lower than that. I'm looking for like somewhere around that 13-point total. To me, there's a little bit of a tipping point thing that happens offensively. And I have no way of proving this. I just sort of think that if you're talking about a team that's against Georgia trending towards 30, then the way in which the game personality evolves is one of those things that could also tip that balance. All of a sudden now Ohio State's actually moving towards 40. It's like you either completely shut down the way that Tennessee was, the way that for the most part Alabama was in the national championship. You either completely shut down or you find enough, room for attack that you actually turn it into an even bigger point total than that. To me, if you're looking at, we said this going to the SEC championship. Hey, if Georgia's up double digits at the half, that may be everything you need to know about the way this game's going to play out. Now, ultimately, the second half felt very different than the first, but Georgia, by the way it played in the first half against LSU, really rendered the second half as garbage time. And that's just kind of how that was. And so it's the same kind of thing here for me on this. Let's say that Georgia, let's say my number 13 is right, and let's say that Georgia's only winning, like, say, 17-13. If Georgia's winning 17-13 at the half against Ohio State, even though that's a relatively narrow margin, as a Georgia fan who desperately wants Georgia to win, I will feel very comfortable at Georgia's ability to win because the game is sort of trending Georgia's way. If Georgia were to be winning, let's say 35-28 at the half, which is kind of an exaggeration, or let's just say 28-24, similar type margin, but a lot more points scored, then that to me, even though Georgia might be winning, is sort of feeling like you're kind of playing more of Ohio State's game. And, look, obviously you don't want to oversimplify things here because, the Georgia offense is plenty explosive. And, certainly you believe in Georgia's ability to score points here. But there is a way in which the best versions of Georgia sort of look. Orange Bowl from last year or Tennessee from this year, where you kind of get up to that early start, you do what you need to do offensively, and then you just sort of take the life out of your opponent. And that low point total for Ohio State in the first half might be an indication that Georgia's on its way to doing that. Let's see what else. Randy Hall says, how many sacks on Saturday? I think you need at least 4. I do. I think 4 would be kind of a magic number there. And I'm basing that on, some of what's happened in the past here. Michigan 4 last year. Bama national championship game 4 last year. I think 4 is a pretty important number there. Some of y'all ask about Ella. So we're going to catch up with Ella again soon. She was not able to join us today, but we're going to catch up with Ella from CBS 46. I should say Atlanta News First here pretty soon. Trippy Charlie says the Buckeyes don't know what's about to hit them. Go Dogs. I like that, Trippy. Very good stuff. Humble Dog says you're either elite or you're not. Let's show Ohio State they are not elite enough. That's what it comes down to right there. You can send a very, very strong message to a team that most Georgia fans don't like very much. Bridget Moorhead says, why is Kirby not hyping fans for crowd noise? Is it assumed? Yeah, that's a good question. I think some of this kind of comes down to the fact that, look, I do expect Georgia to have a decided fan advantage here, but there are going to be a good portion of the people in the stadium that are not Georgia fans. Some of them will be Ohio State fans. There's going to be a little bit of a presence of kind of like the corporate type, the CNBC sort of Atlanta, type, rich folks kind of find a way into a stadium like this. So, even if Georgia has the majority of the fans in the stadium, and I believe they will, the noise that's made in a game like this is still not nearly the same way it is when you talk about a regular game played in your own stadium. I thought last year's national championship, when you got to the fourth quarter and Georgia got the lead and they're trying to soft the thing away even before the Keely Ringo interception, I thought you started hearing a lot more crowd noise then. And last year's Georgia-Alabama game, for the most part, did kind of feel like a real college football game, even though it was kind of a neutral site atmosphere in Indianapolis. There were enough Georgia fans and Alabama fans to sort of make it feel that way. And I no doubt think you'll have a good bit of that kind of vibe in this game on Saturday too, but it is different than a regular kind of home type game where you have a lot more of that going on. Cam Hasty says, I have the same feeling I had leading up to the Tennessee game. UGA can't keep up with that passing game. We shall see, my friend. Dogs on top, 38-20. Yeah, Cam, my frustration about the build-up of the Georgia-Tennessee game was kind of built around, everybody was asking, hey, can Georgia keep up with Tennessee offensively? Can Georgia keep up? Can Georgia, keep pace? But no one was asking the question of, can Tennessee score on the Georgia defense? And I think we have enough preponderance of evidence now to suggest that really is the relevant question going into a game like this. And in the Tennessee game, we found out the answer to that question was just simply no. It's just not. They're not able to do that. And I think Ohio State's kind of built a little bit different. I think there's some things that Ohio State can do in a way that's not quite similar to what Tennessee can do, more pre-snap motion, for instance, and things like that. But the relevant question going into a game like this is not whether Georgia can keep pace offense with Ohio State. It's whether Ohio State can do what other big-time offenses have failed to do, which is score points against Georgia. And listen, maybe the answer is yeah. Maybe Ohio State can take up this Georgia defense and succeed. But a lot of folks who've tried, a lot of teams who have tried have failed in that. And that's going to be an important thing. Brandon Griffin also says have to dial up creative pressure and not let C.J. Stroud get comfortable. Can't give him time and expect our secondary to cover those wide receivers for 5 or 6 seconds. Yeah, you got to have pressure. I think it's really important. Let's go to YouTube here. Fred F. says, thanks for the extra podcast yesterday. Very well done. Fred, I'm glad you enjoyed that. I really am. Thanks for allowing us to kind of do some things different every now and then. I'm glad you enjoyed that. Andrew Hughes says, how do the guys look? Are they excited? Do they look ready? So here's what I'll tell you, Andrew. And sometimes these kinds of observations can be misleading. This is not necessarily an indication that the game's going to go any one way or another. But to me, Georgia very much has the look of a team that was in the playoff a year ago. They just seem to be, well aware of kind of what's required of them in a week like this and how to take, what is a week that has the potential for distraction, how to take that and still find a way to make it a business trip and do what you came here to do, which is win this game against Ohio State. Georgia looks very relaxed in that role here right now. You've got some guys who are a part of this team a year ago. You've got some guys who observed, can learn from the feet at the feet of the leaders from last year's team, and they're trying to take that responsibility on here right now too. So I would say that if you had a chance to spend time with the Georgia team, whether at various points this week I got to, I think that's one of the takeaways you would have is this team just seems pretty comfortable in the environment it's in here at the moment. Jerry Dog fan says UGA's carrying the SEC battle flag on Saturday. Dogs 38-27 over Ohio State. I do believe there's something SEC Big Ten related here to this. Kirby Smart would never acknowledge that. It's not even worth asking about. Ryan Day probably wouldn't either. But in the future, you have two leagues who have completely separated themselves from everybody else. That's just a fact. There's a huge chasm between the SEC Big Ten and virtually every other league in sport, and frankly, every other league in sport. And so in this race for supremacy between this league and that league, you better believe that games like this will have extra meaning, extra cachet in the future as the separation continues. They almost become their own version, like say the National and the American League. Really kind of the twin pillars that describe the top level of the sport. So I don't know that either coach and either side would be willing to acknowledge that. I'm not even quite so sure how much the players even thought about it. But you better believe that is a big part of this. Foster Moss says a case of the long drink will take that stuffiness away. Yeah, I like that, Foster. That's great. That's great. Scott Harris says, I'm back up in Indianapolis for New Year's Eve. Much warmer this time. That's funny. I'm glad to hear you got some warmer weather up there. It was so cold back January. Matt Presley says, who's your X Factor guy for both teams? I think Smith and Mitchell are going to show out. Yeah, I mean, listen, I would love for A.D. Mitchell to get the big play here simply because, he's just been waiting his time for that, right? I mean, it's so similar to what George Pickens went through last year. A guy that you really believe, had he been able to play a full season, could have been a very special wide receiver for Georgia. Well, now, I would say that if I had to guess, Mitchell may be healthier now than Pickens was this time a year ago. So maybe he's ready to do that. And I would say for Ohio State, and I'm never good at pronouncing this guy's name, but if you want to go back and watch the Ohio State Penn State game, let me see if I can. It's hard for me to you go back and watch that game. Strip sack, interception. That's the guy. Let me see if I can give you his name. I'm not good at pronouncing it. Former big time recruit. Tuimoloau, is that how you say it? Tuimoloau, JT Tuimoloau. That's one of those names that when you think about like the traditional Ohio State, because like their defenses when they've actually been good defensively are built a little bit different than Georgia. Like the best version of the Ohio State defenses have like a Bosa or a Chase Young. It's this like superstar player that's so much more well known than anybody else in the group. Whereas like Georgia has been a lot more of an ensemble cast. Last year, even with as many great players they had, that was still kind of an ensemble cast for them defensively. This year, kind of the same thing. Ohio State, its best versions of its defense have kind of been built a little bit differently than that. But that's one of those guys, Tuimoloau. I think, however you say it, I'm not trying to mispronounce the name. I'm just an idiot. I can't pronounce stuff like that too well. But that's a guy that, to me, you go back and watch the Penn State game in particular, he kind of became a one-man show for Ohio State that day. And I actually kind of filed that away in my brain at the time of, if Georgia plays them, that's one of those things you better know where he is at all times, because former elite recruit, Ohio State's got a lot of those guys, major star power in that game against the Nittany Lions. So that's a game I'd be watching for him. Let's see what else. Jonathan Aaron says, I hope Carter takes out all his character issues on CJ on Saturday. Go for 2 and 22, dogs by 50. Yeah, I like that. And I do think it's interesting that, like, you have, on the one hand, the Todd McShay storyline that's kind of been a hot topic this month. And on the other hand, as I said before, is it all kind of works out from a timing perspective really well, because with Carter, getting this extra scrutiny with the spotlight on him, we believe that he truly is really, really important for Georgia on Saturday. But really, really important. That the most vulnerable spot on Ohio State's entire offense may be the area right across from Jalen Carter. So, boom, take advantage of that and demonstrate to anybody who doubts just how good you really are. And, like, to me, and this may be the last thing I say with this Todd McShay deal, the most frustrating part of the whole McShay situation is the fact that even he doesn't really believe what he's saying because, he was talking bad about Carter in the midst of also saying he was going to be the number 2 overall pick in the NFL draft. So either you're exaggerating one thing or you're exaggerating the other. You can't say character concerns for Jalen Carter and I've got him going number 2 overall. I mean, to me, that's the part of this that just doesn't seem very well connected, is the idea that you're going to put this out in the universe, but it's your own report, and you don't even take your own report seriously enough to kind of downgrade him on your own mock drafts. So, that's where that kind of comes from. Bobby Mead says UGA uses running backs. He says UGA's running backs going to be the difference, of course, are tight ends, but I think we have the best stable of backs in the country. 4 deep. That Buckeye run defense is in for a long evening. Yeah, I do think there's a lot of running the football that comes to play in a game like this. I think you're right about that. Zach, I should say Zeh, I mispronounced the name. Zeh checks in to say that Georgia humiliated Oregon and Tennessee. He says if Oregon didn't have to play Georgia and Nick stayed healthy, they would have been the number 1 scoring offense. Tennessee's the current number 1 scoring offense. Yeah, so pretty clearly against teams that have scored against almost everybody, Georgia really demonstrated itself defensively. You are right about that. Let's see what else. Young DeRay says, do you think we'll go 13 personnel in this game, meaning having 3 tight ends in the game? I don't quite know that they'll do that, but I do believe they'll be in 2 tight end sets a lot. And you've heard Ohio State this week talk about what a challenge that's going to be for them. Let's see what else. Let's go to Facebook here for a moment. Keith Fold says, happiest New Year's Eve tomorrow night. When the clock strikes midnight, we're going to be Peach Bowl champions and ready to win on January 9th in California. I like that. Go for 2-22 indeed. Michael O'Neill says, do you think we'll have some young players play that we haven't seen this year? I don't know about that. I think that for the most part, Georgia's going to be what it has been for most of the season. I think that's going to indeed be the case. It'll be interesting to see how much a guy like, say, Marvin Jones Jr. is actually able to play. He's obviously been dealing with that shoulder injury. He was seen practicing the other day. But that's an example of a young player that's going to provide some depth for Georgia. And, that's another one of those injuries that hasn't gotten as much attention as the McConkey and McClendon thing has gotten. But he's obviously dealt with his own health issues, too. Let's see what else. Denise White-Loper says, did anybody else pick up that Day said the first week they worked on conditioning? We've been working on conditioning since last January. Yeah, I mean, that's one of those things that you hope is that Georgia demonstrates once again that it is just sort of the better conditioned team. Obviously that, and so much of the conditioning stuff, how strong you feel late in the game, how fresh you feel late in the game. A lot of that kind of impacts your kind of mental conditioning too, that it's easy to get mental fatigue when you feel physically fatigued. And that's one of the things that I think that Georgia kind of wears on its opponents with. I mean, part of the reason why you see this sort of typical Georgia thing of, hey, big lead in the first half and just kind of lean on you in the second half is because there is a way to kind of tap out in a game like that. The phrase you sometimes hear in the media right now, I guess because a lot of people are unhappy with their careers. You've heard the idea of like quiet quitting. Like there's a little bit of a quiet quit that goes on for a Georgia football game where Georgia's hard enough on you the first 30 minutes that you're like, well, I can't go home, but I'm ready to get out of here. And so therefore I'm just going to go through the motions in these next 2 quarters because I realize what the outcome's going to be. Like that's what sort of Georgia does sometimes. It sort of it makes its opponent kind of quiet quit on you. And so it's that physical conditioning that allows Georgia to do that. The strength, the stamina. And on the other side, when you just realize you don't have as much of that as the guy that you're competing against, that weighs on you mentally. It weighs on you in a big way. Let's see what else. Greg Chandler says Georgia's got the best strength and conditioning in the country. Our players look different, even other teams. And so I'll tell you this, Greg. A lot of media types have kind of talked about the frustration of, or at least the whatever the word is, about not getting to see much during practice. But one of the things I did enjoy from the media availability at practice that I was at on Wednesday is I did see Scott Sinclair like right across from me only a couple of feet away, and even if the drill stuff they were doing was just sort of manufactured and contrived, it was still interesting to see the energy he was approaching all that with, and the way in which Georgia players were responding to him. And it is a little bit. If you go back and watch the video, you can see it yourself. It is a little bit of a glimpse into just how hard they work. Just they no doubt work very, very hard. Steve Shafini and Philip Jordan Wells having a laugh at Ryan Day's expense. Hugh Nash says that must have been so cool yesterday to have that kind of access to players and coaches. It really was cool. It sounded like Charlie Bucket with the golden ticket walking around the chocolate factory. Yeah, I did really enjoy that. And I had gotten to do that back in 2017 at the Rose Bowl for that media day for Georgia. So I had a little bit of an indication of, hey, this is really fun. Obviously, we hope to do that again for the national championship game. It's just sort of the special access that you get for one of these big games that you don't get during the regular season. And honestly, I'm going to give the Georgia players a lot of credit. They're just really cool about it. They were really fun. They were easy to talk to. They've got their certain sort of, trained answers on some things. But if you're just, kind of chatting with them, they're going to just, kind of talk back with you, right? They're very easy to engage with in conversation. So I had a great time. The Georgia players, I thought, made it really fun. Let's see what else. But thank you for saying that, Hugh. I appreciate that. Let's see what else over here on Facebook for a moment. Jamie Richardson says Ohio State is not as explosive as people make them out to be. Yeah, I mean, I understand where you're coming from that a little bit. I mean, listen, I think that Ohio State is being undervalued right now because they lost to Michigan. But if you were to go back prior to the Michigan game, I think there was a good portion of the season that Ohio State was being overvalued. I mean, you don't have to go back too many weeks ago to kind of find people like, oh, Ohio State's clearly the best team in the country. There were some people trying to push that and sell that. And if you're watching them fairly regularly, I think you saw a lot of imperfect football. So, it has been weird to watch the wild swings from a narrative standpoint on Ohio State that this has not been a perfect offense this year, even though they're kind of known as an offensive team, and obviously C.J. Stroud's a Heisman finalist, and Marvin Harrison Jr. has become the latest in the line of best wide receivers in the country that have gone to Ohio State. This has not been a perfect Buckeyes offense this year. It has not. Kyle Cummings asked for a score prediction. Yeah, the score prediction I've been going with is I've got Georgia 31-24. 31-24. That is not quite as, I guess, confident as some of you have been, and yet I am certain, but not quite confident, if that makes sense. Confident would be, Georgia won by 30 points. I don't quite have that level of confidence, but I do have enough certainty to say that I believe that Georgia wins this game, and I believe it wins it by about a touchdown. Joel Mooney says, does Day have a hair coloring dye? NIL deal. Yeah, that's one of those things where, Day's a good bit older than I am. Now, listen, I may be getting, too gray too soon, so maybe I should start dyeing my hair too. But it is always eye-opening when you see somebody who's, a good bit older than me, and he doesn't have a single gray hair anywhere, and it's just like, it's like jet black. It's like the kind of black you don't see anywhere in nature. This is like black. Suspicions are raised when something like that goes on. All right, back on YouTube here. We'll take one final trip around the comment section. We'll get ready to wrap up here today. Interesting observation from Kirby's Belt says that Stroud goes left a lot under pressure. That's interesting. We'll be watching for that. Foster Moss says, do you think the Clemson-Tennessee game will be good? I am very interested in Foster. I actually like Clemson a lot in this spot. I think that Clemson's typically motivated to play these SEC-type games. I think that Clemson still does a lot defensively. I think a lot of their defensive guys are actually playing in this game. I think the opt-outs hurt Tennessee. I think Tennessee, just given the fact they haven't been in a situation like this in quite some time, they may be pretty happy to be down in Miami for a game like this. They may have already hung the mission accomplished banner on their season. I actually like Clemson to probably win this game by a couple of touchdowns. Maybe I'm wrong about that. I'll certainly be curious to see if I might be wrong about that. So I'm interested in the game, and yet I sort of feel like Clemson might win comfortably. Andrew Hughes says, did Stat get the fade? No, he didn't get the haircut. But he also didn't get it for the SEC championship either, right? There was the photo that got shared of him, but that ended up being fake news. He didn't get that haircut, right? So he has not gotten the fade haircut, but he also, I don't think, got it before the SEC championship either, I don't think. Let's see what else. Andrew Hughes says we need to make sure Steck gets the fade. Yeah, I mean, what is it? Xavier Sori's the barber, right? We got to get Xavier on that. By the way, I love the fact that, Sori's going to have that little moniker, but unlike, like, say, Brutus the Barber Beefcake, like, this is not just a gimmick for him. I think he actually really is barber, which is kind of amazing to me. I don't know. The fact that he actually, like, legitimately is, good at cutting people's hair is kind of fun to me. Thomas Tyson says the fade is this should actually go in a coffee mug. He says the fade is temporary, but Stequavius is forever. Thomas, I like that. That's really good. That's really good. Hugh says my hair and makeup person gave me some Kleenex. Yeah, unfortunately, you got to kind of endure this. But we're going to get off the air soon, so you don't have to hear my nasal whine anymore. Brandon Griffin says if Stetson Bennett wins 2 more games, there's going to be a Stet statue in Georgia. I'd be all in favor of that. I'd be very much in favor of that. Cody on the subject of the Ryan Day NIL with Just for Men. Yeah, I'm just telling you. Like, I mean, how old is Ryan Day? I mean, I think he's a good bit older than I am, right? Oh, actually, yeah, he's basically my age. So he's I thought he was older than me, but he's basically my age. But look at this photo of Day. Like, look at my hair. Now, listen, I've gotten way grayer lately, and sometimes the light makes it look grayer than I am. Gray T-shirt doesn't help either sometimes. But this is what a normal man in his 40s looks like. You got a little bit of gray popping up here. Listen, Day is way more handsome than I am. I don't mind giving him credit for that. But this is what 40 looks like right here. A little bit of gray hair, just kind of letting it be, kind of going with it as it is. Ryan Day looks like he's got shoe polish on his head. Like, that is not normal. That is not. Anytime you see somebody whose hair is that black, I'm just here to tell you that is not real. That is not real. So yeah, he's younger than I thought he was, but still, you don't see a lot of guys at 40 who are just they don't have a stitch of gray hair anywhere. Clifton Connor says, I had 0 gray hair at 40. You just age fast. It's putting up the comments like that if it caused me to age, Connor. Or I should say Clifton. Foster Moss says, I'm wearing Buckeye gray. I am absolutely not. I'm wearing Go for 2 and 22. That's what I'm wearing. And listen, the Buckeyes will never know what that feels like. They'll never know what that feels like. All right. Jay Shipes is a mess. All right, we got to go. Let's do one more comment over here on Facebook and then DawgNation.com. Barry Watkins says, I'm 52 and still have a lot of brown hair. Well, there you go. I hope to still have some at 52 there as well. So I swear, I really don't think I'm quite as gray sometimes these lights make me look. I feel like we need softer lighting at some point in time. I feel like our lighting sometimes is a little harsh. Well, you can't. If you do that, we're going to lose we're going to. Unfortunately, given the current configurations of the studio, we can't quite do that. But I do feel like a little softer lighting would work well on me. You know how, like, the aging TV star, sometimes you kind of put, like, what looks like the Vaseline on the TV camera to kind of so you don't quite see some of the blemishes. I may have to start doing some of that kind of stuff. Jay Harwell's calling him Ryan, instead of Ryan Day, calling him Ryan Dye. That's really funny. That's really funny. Andrew Hughes, thank you for the kind words. I appreciate that. Kent Holcomb says, I've had a gray beard since I was 35 and hair since 50. So there you go. So I guess the beard went first. It's kind of interesting. Marcus Shaven says, I'm 30 and going gray. Thanks, Army. Yeah, so Marcus says he earned that gray hair the old-fashioned way right there in the United States Armed Services. So, Marcus, first of all, we appreciate your service to our country, and certainly you've got some well-earned gray hairs there. And kind of reminds me of, like, sometimes my daughter, if I'm holding her up, she would look at my hair and say, Daddy, why do you have so much gray hair? And I always tell her, I didn't have that gray hair before you were born. So that's just my little way of joking with her a little bit. Let's see what else. Philip Jordan Wells says the Orange Bowl should be considered the battle of the horrid. Yeah, it's going to be a lot of orange in one place. You get the Orange Bowl, the orange teams. That'd be a very, very tricky situation when you got both teams kind of wearing orange, People say, well, it's different colors of orange. It's hard for me to tell that apart. Richard Pollard says 8 p.m. tomorrow. Can't get here fast enough. Richard, I'm right there with you on that. Humble Dog says you're either elite or you're not. Let's show Ohio State they're not elite enough. Yeah, we said that a little earlier. Let's get our final comments here. Anything else before we get ready to wrap up? Let me see if I can refresh these DawgNation.com comments. Get a few more in here. Let's see what else. John Hendricks says he's looking forward to tomorrow night. That's true. Jim says that I sound like I'm half dead. I really don't feel bad. I just sound bad, I guess. He says hopefully that Ladd McConkey can push through much the same way. Yeah, listen, I think Ladd McConkey's in way better shape than I am. Way better shape than I am. All right. Charles Womack also says Happy New Year, Dog Nation. Enjoy the show and the comment section. Charles, Happy New Year to all of you, and thanks so much for being a part of it. We appreciate all of that. Okay, we got to go for now. See you a lot on video tomorrow. Get your game face on. Be ready to go. Fun one in Atlanta. So much on the line. So much at stake. Go for 2 and 22. Sometimes it really is as simple as that. Next step on that takes place tomorrow. By the way, y'all find R.S. Andrews online, rsandrews.com, for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. Also happy to tell you what I guess is our season finale edition of Go With The Flow presented by R.S. Andrews tonight on the Dog Nation video channels, making some picks for some of these bowl games. So we've got that coming up here. We'll look forward to doing that with you on Go With The Flow. And of course, we always appreciate R.S. Andrews being here for our air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. If your water heater goes out, in many cases, R.S. Andrews can replace for you the same day. But you got to find him online at rsandrews.com. Y'all have a great day. We will look forward to seeing you. I got a lot more gray than Ryan Day does, but listen, at least I'm natural. I don't quite think you could say the same thing about him. He almost looks like, remember like back in the 90s when like Macho Man Randy Savage would like spray paint his hair? Like he's just spray painting the thing. I feel like there may be some of that going on with Day there. But nonetheless, y'all have a good day, no pun intended. We'll see you back here tomorrow, not for Dog Nation Daily, but for game day coverage throughout the day from Atlanta. We'll talk to you then, everybody.